Hey everybody, it's Doug Green and I'm the publisher of Technology Reseller News, and this is a special podcast and podcast series for the ASCDI ITAD Association and Technology Reseller News. And we have with us today Noa Sussman of TecEx. Noa, thank you for joining me today.
Doug, thank you for having me. I really am excited about being here and being part of this podcast.
Well, Noa, thank you very much for joining me today. And we're going to be doing actually a series of these podcasts on a really interesting topic. We're going to be talking from now on about cross-border IT shipments, a guide to draining the complexity. So this is a huge issue. It's something that impacts all of our readers and watchers. We hope to be doing this on a cadence of a fortnightly basis. So I hope everyone enjoys this first one and keeps on watching. So Noa, before we dive into our topic, briefly, what is TecEx?
So TecEx is a company, it's part of that IT, which has been around for around 25 years. TecEx itself has been around for about between 10 and 12 years, really dealing in the IT infrastructure space where we work with hyperscalers, resellers, OEMs, anyone along the channel to help deploy their equipment on a global scale, help with their compliance, their risk management, and really just are there as trusted partners, kind of navigating the complexities of global expansion.
So Noa, why is shipping IT equipment across borders so difficult?
So very good question. I think most people's attitude is like, well, stick it in a FedEx box and put a label on and it should get to where it's supposed to go. And I think that works if you're doing it from New York to California. But the minute you cross border, you run into a whole lot of issues. So the first issue, a very topical one, is going to be tariffs, duties, and taxes, which will differ from depending on the country, depending on the commodity shipped. You also have certifications, permits, licenses that are required to import into a country. Again, it's very country specific and product specific. You have the same on the export. A very big thing is with, I think a discussion has been the export of GPUs out of the US into certain countries. So that's very topical at the moment. And that, again, it's commodity based. And then I think the biggest challenge is that for most countries, you need to have a registered entity in that country that is responsible for the import. So for a global company, a multinational, they may have a data center, they may have a sales office, they may have a point of presence, but they're not going to have an importing entity. So that immediately puts an obstacle or a roadblock in place of global shipping. So if you take all of that into the mix, it becomes very complex when you're shipping into multiple locations to actually navigate and understand, how do I get my equipment from point A to point B?
And what you just told me is, because I think a lot of people think the way I thought just before this was, well, what's the problem? FedEx is my agent. They'll take care of everything. They tell me that they'll take care of everything. And what I just heard is not necessarily so.
100%. And I don't know, Doug, if you want to hear some horror stories.
Sure.
Because
sure.
I've got, it's something that we hear all the time from companies who are approaching us. And with that exact sentiment that their logistics or shipping team are, okay, I have to get this to a foreign country, we'll stick it in a FedEx box. And I have a client they have a customer, and this is exactly what their customer was doing. So they're shipping in a FedEx box. It wasn't big packaging, so they were able to kind of slip through customs. It was going to China, and one of them got stopped. And the minute it got stopped, they then customs will check, is there a registered entity, which is known as the IOR or the import of record. Obviously, there wasn't a real registered entity, so they did an audit, which most people are unaware. You can do an audit up to 5 or 7 years post-shipment. And they opened up every single shipment that this company had imported into China, and they ended up realizing that it had not been compliant, the permit hadn't been applied for, and they levied $1 million fine on this company and almost shut them down from trading in China. So that's one story, which showing the huge implications. Another story as well, I mean, there's a client shipping into Mexico. And again, we'll just use FedEx. We don't have to pay money to risk management and to get it into a foreign country if we can just ship it via FedEx. And I think they called us when they had 5 stuck shipments in customs, and we came into the picture, and unfortunately we weren't able to help them at that point, and every single shipment of theirs was destroyed by customs. So they lost not only did they lose the actual equipment, which was costly, but they lost, it was like 3 months later after trying to just get this cleared through customs. So they lost all that time. They lost, obviously, they now were sitting in a position where they had a customer who was very unhappy, and it just did not put them in a very good position from a go-to-market strategy.
I think I've had the experience, even as a journalist, of having to move a box to, cross overseas. One thing that all the little forms that FedEx has you fill out, it never tells you about this in-country representation issue that you're surfacing. I don't think a lot of people seem to be aware of that. Correct,
100%. And I'll tell you is that the reason being, and I've spoken to quite a few FedEx sales reps that I actually deal quite closely with, when you have an airway bill or the document that you are filling out on your FedEx box or UPS or DHL, it doesn't have to be FedEx, it can be any courier. It will say consignee, and that consignee is who it's going to. And FedEx assumes that the consignee that it's going to is going to be registered with customs as an import to the foreign country. They're not there to do your compliance work for you. They're there to literally pick up the package and move it to the foreign customs. So if there's a permit that's needed, if there's a license that's required, they assume that that's someone, that's going to be taken care of by the send of the package, and they assume that everything is correct. So we'll have sometimes somebody reaching out to us at TecEx to say, FedEx has come back to them to say that customs is requiring an import of record. Can you help?
And how does TecEx step into that? In other words, what's happening with you guys with regard to this importer of record issue?
So good question. And that really gets to one of the core services that we offer. And that is we are registered as the IOR in over about 200 global locations. So when we work with our clients, besides offering the compliance and the tax and the consulting, like the consultancy part of the business, we are able to do the full deployment. So we'll work with a FedEx or a UPS or DHL or freight forwarder to move the goods to the foreign country, and then we'll do all the licenses, the permits, and clear it through customs, pay over all the duties and taxes, and we'll act as that importer of record. And just as well, what most people aren't aware is if you are sending something out of a country, so you're exporting, you also have to have a registered entity, and that's known as the exporter of record. So we will act as the exporter of record as well.
And this is amazing to me that I had heard of some of these issues that had come up before, but 7 years, in other words, just because you've successfully, or you think you've successfully imported or exported a product or a box or whatever, it doesn't mean it's over. It could come back and bite you 5 years later.
100%. And that's exactly what I'll tell when I'm talking to, a company. Let's say I'm talking to a shipping team or logistics, person at a company who is saying to me that, look, we ship with FedEx, it's no issue. I'll be like, yes, it may have slipped through customs, but you've now put your entire company at risk. Because if it is audited, that shipment is audited at a later stage, that not only can you come back with the taxes and the penalties, but there may be the chance that the company will turn around and say, will turn around and say, we don't want you trading in our country anymore, or we are penalizing you and not allowing you to bring in any more shipments. So it's not something, for most people, they consider the risk at the time of clearance. I consider that to be the lowest part of the smallest risk when shipping, because just because you get through customs and to the end address in the country doesn't mean that you are clear and free of any repercussions.
So what's starting to emerge earlier in our series here is that there's a gap in the shipping process for many people. Especially if they're not used to regularly shipping outside of where they are. And that is UPS, FedEx, DHL, whoever you're dealing with. That's interesting. They're already assuming that you have somebody doing this for you. And they're not going to cover what they're just providing the shipping service. They're not acting as the customs agent.
Correct. So again, 100%, and we work very closely with these types of courier companies and freight forwarders, because if a client comes and says, I want what's known as DDP, which is basically a drop shipment into the foreign country, they need to have an entity who will be able to be responsible to customs for that import. And since FedEx or UPS or DHL will not necessarily be the importer of record, they don't have that presence, or if they do have that presence, they don't want their presence being used, because that's the other thing as well. I think a lot of companies don't realize is that the importer of record has a risk now of not only this audit of 5 or 7 years down the line, but there's all tax implications now by being, an importer and bringing in, equipment or whatever commodity you're bringing in. So it exposes companies to, to tax implications that they don't necessarily want to be exposed to. So a lot of multinationals, even if they have the capabilities of being importer of record, they actually shy away from it, from a trade compliance perspective and from a tax perspective. So yes, there is a big gap, and that's why we always try and take it to a C-suite level discussion, because at C-suite and at board level, if they can understand what the ramifications are, what this can actually do to your company, I think it would be a topic that would be taken more seriously. And at the moment, it's a topic that's kind of like discussed with the logistics guys, but then there's not an appropriate budget that's given to support.
So now, you made us really understand that I'm going to go back to the thing that everyone thinks. No problem. I'll put it in the DHL box. After all, they're global. The TV ads tell me that they're going to take care of it. We now understand there's a level of complexity. And in fact, bad decisions can even come back and bite you a half a decade later. So now I need to go and find a partner. How do I do that? Why does that matter?
So 100%. So that is a good question, because at the end of the day, finding the right partner is very, very important. And I think when looking for the right partner, it's not about seeing who's the cheapest on the market, which is what I think companies tend to do, because again, they've got that philosophy of, if I get it through custom, it's fine, and as long as that's happening. But really, I think that the right partner's got to be someone or a company that has the capabilities, so the global footprint, who has the understanding of the different, certifications, permits, the different tax structures, duties in the different countries. And if you don't have the right partner working with you, even if you have an in-house, a lot of people will say, oh, well, it's a big company. They have their own in-house logistics team or their own in-house trade compliance. That may be correct, but we see how fast and how quickly things are changing all the time. And it's impossible for one small team to keep up with the taxes and the tariffs and the certifications required in the different, and the classifications of the goods in the different countries. So outsourcing this to a company this is their expertise. They have real people on the ground in the foreign country. They have the entity. Just ensures that you are taking risk management seriously, that you're minimizing and mitigating your risk, and that you are putting in place all the checks and balances to ensure that your go-to-market strategy can really be implemented in an efficient and cost-effective and risk-free manner.
We've been talking about this so far in an administrative way. What can go wrong, what can go right, but it's all sort of an administrative issue so far. It also starts to occur to me that this is connected to growth. In other words, if you have the right partner, and if your equipment is not stuck at the border constantly, then you can enable better growth. You can enable a better partnership with whoever you're trading with.
100%, Doug. And I'll tell you where that comes in is very much when you're a startup, or even if you're an established company and you want to look at new markets, and you may want to set yourself up there with an entity at some point because you're going to be offering services in that country. You may want to be established there, but you have to first test the market. And in order, it's kind of like a catch-22 because you can't test the market if you don't actually get your infrastructure there or build out your data center. So, but you can't get your equipment in if you don't have your established, your entity. So being able to use a trusted partner who can help you with, when you're testing the waters, and they can be the ones responsible for moving the equipment into the foreign country while you test the markets, is going to be far more efficient than kind of having to wait to establish yourselves as an entity, work out all the compliance, bring everything in, and then only decide, okay, let's try it out. And then if it fails, you've now wasted all this time and money. So that's number one, is that if you're testing out new markets and expand, because you want to expand, using a partner is much more efficient. The other thing as well, especially like going into the AI space, it's very competitive. And if you don't get into the market quickly and efficiently, then your competitor comes in, you've lost, a good portion of the market share. So if you're going to try and sit there for months and months, and it's no joke, I mean, companies will tell me, their trade compliance team, their logistics team will sit there for months and months trying to work out what's the classification of the goods? How do I get it there? Did it get stuck in customs? And if this is what you're going to be spending your time with because you're trying to save money, by the time you actually get into the country, your competitor's already up and running and you now have lost significant market share. So I feel like from a business perspective, which again, just going to my point before, is that it really is a boardroom discussion when looking at growth and expansion and just go-to-market strategy. Because if you don't understand when you can get the goods into the country, if you have no idea of how long it's going to take, how do you actually determine, your go-to-market strategy? How do you determine your starting date? And how do you even determine a budget? So you can't assign a budget of what it's going to cost. And that's also for another discussion we can, in another podcast, is that people underestimate what it actually costs to get cross-border. So they may think it's X and they budget for that. And when they get to border, it's far more than they've anticipated. And now they can't release it from customs because they don't have the cash flow to pay those taxes and duties. But that we can kind of leave for another podcast.
Well, no, I really want to thank you for joining me today in this introductory podcast, a podcast series on global shipping, the complexities of it, a guide to draining the complexity of it. And I think I've learned a lot. I think the biggest takeaway for me is just where you started. You don't just put it in the box and hope for the best. That's just the beginning of what you need to do. There's some more things you need to do. So this is the beginning of a podcast series. Join us next time. We're going to be starting to break down one by one some of the topics we discussed today, how to choose a partner, the complexity of tariffs, changing tariffs, the way regulations and compliances can change, finding somebody who understands what's happening currently and all that. But for now, Noa, where can we learn more?
So thank you firstly, Doug, for inviting me onto this podcast. Very exciting to, doing a recurring series with you. And I think that I'm always happy to chat to people. They can reach out to me. The best form is probably LinkedIn. And always happy to share to share what's happening out there in the market. And if I could just say, I know I've kind of come in with a lot of scary notions and things that could put people off global expansion, but really just want to say that if it's done with the right partner, it can be done efficiently. It can be done in a risk-free manner. And I'm not here to scare anyone, but really to give them the tools and the understanding of just how to do it correctly.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. What we're talking about is always true of everything you do in business. Everything has a process, and if you do it properly, the rewards can be great. But if you do it in a kind of slapdash way, it can go the other way.
100%.
Well, I hope everybody goes and checks out what's happening at TecEx. Take a look. You can contact Noa on LinkedIn. There's the link right there. Just click on it and you can find her right on LinkedIn. They are a company that will talk to you personally and discuss with your needs and explore with them. Please join us next time when we continue to work on this topic. But for now, Noa, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Doug.